In my daily life, there are things that I want to do, but I'm not doing them. Then there are things that I do that I don't want to. Why? Maybe many people can relate to this. Well, I'm aware of the complexity of being human. But here, I would like to share with you a simple framework. I would call it triangular self that can explain one of the reasons behind this universal human dilemma. More importantly, this framework can be a powerful tool for personal development. Oh, hi there. Welcome back. My name is Shibu and I'm a psychologist based in the UK. So, let's start with the base of the triangle. At the two extremes of the base, we find two versions of ourselves. I shall call them the inner self and the outer self. Let me explain what they are. For instance, I would like to start my day for a few minutes in the morning with a little bit of stretching, a bit of yoga, and then the morning comes and I meet two versions of myself. There is this one version of Shibu who knows that whenever he managed to do a little bit of yoga in the morning, he felt really good about it. And he started the day on a positive note, and obviously the day would be good, it would be qualitatively different from other days. And this version of Shibu would like to spend a few minutes of doing yoga in the morning. And then there is another version of Shibu who resists. This version of me tries to avoid any discomfort at any cost. He is very, very clever and comes up with all kinds of reasons. Oh, today it's a full-on day. He would say, you have so much on your plate, so you should be getting on with other things today, and you will do yoga tomorrow. Or it would say, state of mind is more important, state of consciousness is important. So why don't you do a little bit of meditation first and then you can do yoga later on. As you know, that later on never comes. I'm sure many people can relate to this. You see, the inner self is that part in us that seeks more life, more aliveness. And the outer self, which is basically this body self, is not happy and it resists. Now, that's the battle. But you see, that's not the case all the time. Now, if you think of my habit of having a shower every morning, there is no battle between the inner and the outer. Both of them love that good feeling. And so here there is no space for any battle. As you can see, the two versions in us throughout the day, they are at war at sometimes, and they are at peace, they are in harmony at other times. So the obvious question now is, when there is a conflict between the two, what is at the root of this friction between them? The answer to this will help us to think of tools for bringing more harmony, more wholeness, so that we will be able to engage with life in such a way that we will be able to do more of things that we want to do and less of things that we don't want to do. The simple answer is that the inner self and the outer self have two different perspectives. Basically, they don't agree with each other because their views are different. Let us go back to the example of yoga in the morning. If I ask my inner self, hey, what do you think of doing some yoga in the morning? He would say, I would love to do a bit of yoga in the morning. It's such a good feeling afterwards. I feel more alive and more energetic during the day. I feel like having a control over my life because I'm doing what I want to do in my life. And I don't particularly like that sense of weakness that I feel when I don't do it. But the outer self, the body self, by the way, I'm going to use these two terms, the outer self and the body self, interchangeably. So the body self goes, I feel so stiff in the morning. I find it particularly uncomfortable to do all that stretching and going into all those postures so early in the morning. So if you ask again the body self, why do you dislike so much anything that is uncomfortable? Most of the time the answer would be, I am scared. You see, if we go deeper into the resistance of this body self in any aspect of life, almost all the time we find one thing: feeling unsafe. You see, the body self is programmed to survive. And this part of us looks at anything that is uncomfortable, whether it is psychological or physical, as a threat to its survival. Now, can you see the 2 points of view here? The inner self is seeing something as a good thing, but the same thing is seen by the other self as a threat to its survival. So, what we said so far is that there are 2 different versions of ourselves that are in conflict at times. And this friction is down to 2 different points of view. So our quest is to understand whether it is possible for the body self to change its perspective, the way it is seeing something, then it can stop resisting. And if the answer to that is yes, then we have to ask how. And that's what we are going to explore in the next section. So, is it possible at all for the body self to change its position and see something differently? The answer to this should be yes. Let me explain why. If you consider all human relationships, they keep evolving for better or worse. If you think of 2 people being angry with each other and they both stand firm to their views, they do not want to listen or relate to each other at all, then nothing can change. But if they are willing to start listening and relating, and then slowly the perception changes and the relationship changes. It's the same here too. If the 2 parts in us, the inner self and the outer self, are willing to enter into a relationship, to listen to each other, then the body self will begin to change its perception. It will be willing to see things differently. So, let's look at that possible relationship, a dialogue between them. As you can understand, this conversation can be a long one, and it can go deeper and it may open up other topics as well. But imagine this. If through such a conversation, my transformed body self says to me, "Hey Shibu, now I love starting the day with a bit of yoga in the morning and I want to carry that good feeling forward throughout the day." Wow, that would be amazing, wouldn't it? No more conflict and I have a new habit. But I know that some of you might be thinking, this is interesting, but all this sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? Good question. And that leads us to the next section. The catch is that we need to understand what we are dealing with when we try to change the viewpoint of the body self and its resistance. As we mentioned earlier, the body self is programmed to keep me safe. This part in me is constantly scanning the environment to see whether I'm safe. Am I good enough? What have I achieved? Or am I safe financially? Is there going to be enough for tomorrow? Is my body okay? Am I going to be healthy tomorrow? Am I okay in my relationship? Do people respect me? Do people approve me? Or is constantly scanned? You see, all this is not necessarily happening on a conscious level. In most of us, this may have become our habitual self. Yes, the level of feeling safe or unsafe can vary from person to person depending on a number of factors that are complex and subjective. Greater the sense of feeling unsafe, greater the possibility of seeking unhealthy behaviors as coping mechanism, as a way of soothing. You see, the body self prefers immediate gratification. Usually it doesn't want to think about the benefits of choices in the future. If you think about it, this tendency in most of us of avoiding the discomfort and seeking immediate gratification is a pattern that we have repeated and repeated so many times that it has grown in strength. For instance, take a particular area of your life that is in conflict. Then imagine the inner self and the outer self in relation to that as 2 little children. Now ask yourself, who did I feed most? Most of the time, on one side, we can see this body self that has grown in strength. And then on the other side, there is his inner self as a tiny, feeble thing. Most of us, consciously or unconsciously, knowingly or unknowingly, we have been feeding the body self with the wrong stuff. And we find it difficult to take that power back to ourselves. Now, I do not want to make this body self all negative or to paint it as a monster. Because you see, this side of me has kept me safe. He has taken care of me. It's there for a purpose. The intentions are good. But when it comes to my personal growth today, often he is standing in the way. So I need to inform him, educate him, help him to see things differently. I need to transform him, I need to upgrade him. And the good news is that this is definitely possible. But because the inner self is weak, this part in us cannot do it alone. So who do we turn to? There is someone in us who can help, and I shall call that part the great mediator. Who is this mediator in us? Now remember that I call this framework the triangular self. We have the inner self and the outer self at the base of the triangle. The mediator is at the top of the triangle, and that's our will. Remember that dialogue between the two versions of me? That dialogue, that relationship between the two was possible because there was my will to relate, my willingness to choose to relate. And such a relationship between the two was possible because my will was directing my awareness and the intellect to bring more light on these two selves. You see, we can see that in the absence of such a relationship, the body self would hijack the will, the awareness, the intellect. Because you see, when these things happen, we are not even aware of the two parts in us. The body self simply runs the show on autopilot. There's no awareness. In the absence of awareness, there is no choice because the will has nothing to choose from. And also the body self, as we saw earlier, would use the reasoning mind to bring clever excuses to manipulate and execute its own agenda. So the intellect is also hijacked. When we become aware of these two parts in us, then it is possible for the will to facilitate a relationship between them. And in that sense, the purpose of the will is not to push through the resistance of the body self, but to gently guide other faculties such as awareness and the reasoning mind to shift the balance of power between the inner and the outer selves. You see, usually most of our well-meaning intentions and resolutions fail because we are trying to force the change through sheer willpower. Yes, it can work at times, but often it fails. The right use of the will is to direct our attention, our awareness, and the reasoning mind so that all different parts in us are in perfect alignment. Its job is to dissipate the conflict. This is a huge distinction. I don't know how else to emphasize this, but it's like turning our usual understanding of the will upside down. Once the body self changes its perspective, then there is no resistance, nothing to push against. The body self becomes an ally. It's not more an enemy. Of course, all this means to dedicate time to enter into a relationship, to process the resistance in us, to go deeper, and to see the fear at the root of it all. And once we see the fear will be neutralized, and then there will be very little space for resistance. You see, we could have more result in this way than trying to push against the resistance itself. I hope many of you would find this framework useful. You see, with any area of your life, when you realize that there is an internal conflict, the conflict between these two selves, you can imagine this triangular self. On one side there is his outer self or the body self, and here there is the inner self. And here on top is my will. And that can direct my awareness and facilitate this conversation between them so that they can realize that they don't need to be enemies, they can be partners, and they both can benefit from this. You can do this process by sitting down comfortably and imagine this conversation inside you, between the outer, the body self, and the inner self. You can also, sometimes I found useful to take a sheet of paper and I created two columns, and then I imagine this conversation between them, and I actually write them down because then that gives me greater focus. It doesn't allow me to be distracted. Sometimes during my daily life, I find it useful to imagine this, and if I become anxious or worried about something, I immediately see the body self being anxious, feeling unsafe, and then I talk to it and say, you are safe, there is nothing to be worried about. I find it really, really useful. You see, this framework of the triangular self can be compared to metaphors and stories in some scriptures and traditions. Think of the story of creation in the Bible. The body self within me is metaphorically me being kicked out of the Garden of Eden, feeling disconnected from the spirit of life, then feeling lonely and unsafe. The name Eden means a state of great delight, and in that sense, the longing of the inner self is wanting to go back to the garden and be with the oneness of life, where there is greater life, greater freedom. Similarly, if you think of the journey in the Bible from Egypt to Canaan, from slavery to the promised land, it is a journey of the body self from a state of bondage to a state where there is greater life, knowing that I am in my essence always protected, always cared for. In Hindu scriptures, there is a story of Rama and his wife Sita. Name Rama means supreme delight. And Rama and Sita, they were delightfully united in life until Sita is kidnapped by Ravana, the 10-headed demon, and is taken to Lanka. Here it means a fragmented land. You see, this is the state of the body self, feeling fragmented and lonely and is deprived of happiness. You see, the need to discover different phases of our own outer self, the body self, that kidnaps our own joy. These stories are so rich in meaning and gives us insights on how to overcome these resistance, the 10-headed demon in us, and to become one with the divine, the source of all life, to bring balance instead of conflict. If you are enjoying this video and if you are curious to know more about topics along this line, give me that thumbs up, and if you hit that subscribe button, you will never miss a future upload. Thank you. And before I wrap up, let's look at some of the key takeaways from this video. Strengthening of our willpower does not mean to push against the resistance, but it means to grow in our ability to direct different faculties in us. When we do this, usually we facilitate a relationship between different parts in us. And when there is that relationship, usually the body self starts to shift its perspective, the way it sees things, and in that way we dissipate the resistance in us. As you can see, all this process means that we grow in our ability to make choices that will bring greater freedom and more sense of aliveness in us. Before I let you go, I need to say something. This kind of knowledge has true power only if we commit to processes that are helpful and experience the benefit for ourselves. I know that is a cliche, but the real power is in the practice. So good luck and thanks for listening. If you leave your comments with your thoughts and things that you want to explore more, that will help me to create videos that are relevant to you. Thanks again, and may life bless you.